Yes.
Super Serial Stream is live.
I was singing songs from the Deadpool soundtrack, which, like, if you have not actually listened to that soundtrack, it's just stuff that plays in the background that is just funnier than the actual movie itself, and you won't even notice it. So, welcome to the Camelot Unchained weekly update stream. Today,
Super Serious Stream.
Super Serial Stream. Only 80s kids will get that reference. Not really. If you had an Apple II, there was a Super Cereal card because the Apple did not have a cereal anyway. This is Andrew, and I have with me Tim, and we are here for your very, very serious weekly update stream. We've been kind of busy, so I am pretty much just popped out of code reviews to take a look at the list of things for the week.
So we'll start off with our rich, creepy uncle sent us some pizza for lunch today, and we're super appreciative, and it was yummy, and thank you very much. Everyone should have a super rich, creepy uncle, but we've got one, so haha. And
Mark is not the rich, creepy uncle.
No.
No. This is someone totally unrelated to Mark.
Yeah, just one of our backers.
Yes.
In terms of testing, we've got a bunch of stuff that's sort of in flight, in the air, in progress right now. Some big changes to low-level stuff that we're waiting to mature before we do new testing. So there's not likely to be testing this weekend unless we get some crazy stuff through code review and just sort of jam it in the test hole.
I may just push stuff up there without review just so we can get actual testing on it. We can talk about that after this. But yeah, so we kind of, as we push towards beta, we, sometimes take the shortest path, and then you acquire what engineers refer to as tech debt, where, every place that I took a shortcut, then, that's like, all right, this little thing is held together with duct tape, and now I'm going to have to deal with the duct tape every time I touch that again. So
you're taking a man-hours loan.
Yeah, you're borrowing from the future and paying it down and starting to move forward. So I'm going to slightly reorganize Tyler's list and say what have we been doing. Number one is working on the just pipeline for us internally to build skill parts. As we built out the set of classes and skills we had with, that we brought out with Beta 1, we locked that down to a specific set of skills. But the idea of being able to build your skills out of, composing parts of, like, I take a slashing rune plus a high damage rune plus an armor penetration rune and set that up, like that is still absolutely the plan. That is what we had done behind the scenes and just pre-built a certain set of skills that was useful for scenarios. But we haven't gotten away from the skill parts. So, and in the course of doing that, we looked at, okay, so how many skill parts did we build and how long did it take? And so, okay, the average time to build a skill part is about this long. So let's see, we have this many classes times roughly this many skill parts per class times this many designer hours per skill part. Oh no, that number is way too long. So, you look at, okay, how can we actually get that number down to the point where we have where we have the right, our classes and our skills in a final form, sometime in 2019. And, okay, well, do you want to cut the number of classes? No. Do you want to cut the number of skills per class? No. So, and what that leaves you with is, can you make it either much faster to make a skill part here on our side as designers, or, do you hire more designers? And we're pretty happy with the design team we have. We just need to make them more productive. So what we've been doing is taking a look at, okay, what is the actual tooling? Why does it take this much time to make a skill part? Are there, better interfaces we can have? Are there ways we can make it less error prone so you don't have to do as many cycles of, work on it, test it, work on it, test it? Are there ways that we can improve the iteration cycle so that the round trip between I made a change, I tested it in the game is much faster? And all three of those things have been a focus here. We have grown the size of our tools team, although no specific people or anything to announce on that end. And we've been doing a lot of tech work towards that. And I think we are going to be in a really good place. So.
Yeah, and out of a lot of that, sort of, we're doing a lot of, and while we're in here, improving various things to support some of the more complex systems that we could have supported before, but in awkward, unperformant ways. So, in the midst of making Ben and Mark able to crank out all of our abilities and skill parts and all of that much faster, we're getting some general improvements and better features out of them.
Right. And so, that's where that is, and a lot of that has taken almost all of Rob and Caleb's time, a big part of my and Ben's time on just focus on that loop. So, and making sure we have absolutely everything we have to build out all of our magic using classes, and all the other things, and to do it, and to be able to build them quickly.
So there's been a lot of design, architecture, planning, infrastructure talks this week.
Yeah, whiteboards filled with stuff. So last week we had Caleb out here, or here on the East Coast, and this week he and Rob have been kind of pair programming with their screen shared most of the week, and I think we're coming into a final design on what the new editing process is and all that. So
last week and the first half of this week was lots and lots of meetings and plannings, and now we're starting to put stuff together and put code to paper.
Yep. So number 2, Coherent. Coherent, if you don't know, is we're still using HTML and JavaScript basically to have the game's UI as a single-page web app. We're switching, and we're still using a fork of the Chrome browser source behind it, but we're switching from one fork of the Chrome browser source to another, which will let us get much more efficiency, and that's sort of the blocking thing on turning on a 64-bit client. So we've gotten to the point where that's all integrated, and the main thing left to do there is sort of the communication layer between the C++ client and the JavaScript in the UI, and it's Matt and JB have just been going through there like a bulldozer. All right, fix this widget, fix this widget, fix this widget. Just move the communication layer to the new thing. So that's the unknowns have been resolved there, and that's just trucking through.
Yeah, when I spoke with JB this morning, as Andrew said, we sort of last week we got most of the rendery bits out of the way. Dave's been fixing some miscellaneous issues with that this week. JB and Matt have been working on the API. I think those of you in the mod squad will get to chip in hopefully next week as we go in and retool all the existing UI to use the new API.
Okay, so third thing is another me thing. Well, I haven't been touching Coherent. I've been in the design meetings for the ability work, or the skill design workflow. Kind of in the background, like, when we started this project, multi-threading, going like fully aggressively multi-threaded, not just like, oh, here's a rendering thread and here's the world update thread, and so we can take advantage of 2 whole threads, but totally pervasive, split it everything out to all the cores was a new new concept. Not a lot of people in the game industry had done it, and we had various approaches that we took to various systems, and with the benefit of hindsight, some of those approaches have worked really, really well, and some of those approaches have, well, we made them work.
Well, and if you have a medley of approaches, even if all of them were phenomenal approaches, when they start rubbing up against other solutions, you just run into problems.
Yeah. We looked at what are the things that have been really, really successful, and the two things that have been successful were sort of immutable, persistent data structures, like we do with the building code and the entities on the server, and tightly bound contexts of execution from George's work with the parallel library, which you can find on GitHub in like an old version. We'll push his version out soon, and then those two things are those are the things that are definitely the success story. And one of the things that has not been a success story is the way the terrain is managed. And so what we did I did a lot of work to take kind of the way we managed concurrency and data synchronization and all in the system that destroys and mutates and compresses differences of buildings, and moved that into kind of its own standalone library that we can now use in terrain. And it's really, really infrastructural work, but it's done. So
and not yet hooked up to terrain, right?
No, not yet, but that'll be it should go in fairly quickly now that it's there.
Right.
And hopefully the library, we may talk about open sourcing it. I'm going to talk to Mark about it. It's good code.
Yeah, for what it's worth, like we said, the terrain stuff before was multi-threaded and I believe highly multi-threaded, just not greatly multi-threaded.
It had lots of little locks embedded within each terrain section, and that led to, sometimes there would be stalls, sometimes you'd be like, okay, I want to make it made it very, very hard for things outside the terrain system to make a change to the terrain system. So, there was no ability for plots to deform terrain. Things like rivers couldn't just like carve out a riverness through the land. So getting it to a point where that's workable should unlock those things. So So number 4, Colin's been doing work towards splitting off a separate building server. He's kind of our network guy, master of server scalability, and building updates slow down the game server when we have to do like big calculations of, okay, how does damage propagate through this building when it gets hit. So he's been spinning that off and all the building updates off into their own dedicated server, so that like the core game loop of I hit you, you hit me never gets slowed down. So yay, more horizontal scalability. So how about you take one? I'm taking like the first 4.
Number 5 is a little bit of tech and art. The crafting UI. AJ's been plugging away at the crafting UI. It's hooked up to a new API that Christina built for it, allowing him to craft things. And the next part is updating the style work coming from Michelle and James. So we've got all the API front end and back end stuff glued up. I'm not sure if it's been through review, but it will very shortly. And so it's functional. It's just not super pretty yet. And I think we've mentioned in weeks past that Ku and Michelle have been working on a new UI for the Vox and the crafting system. And so once we get that shiny veneer on top of all the tech that AJ's been working on, we'll have super sexy crafting.
Yep. So number 6, sound LODs. This is something that, if it's done right, you're probably not going to notice it in the game, but you'll notice it in your frame rate. Our approach to sound has just been take every sound in the game world and shove it at our sound engine. So if you had 1,000 people all swinging their swords at once, then there'd be 1,000 sword swing sounds getting played. And now we've managed that a lot more aggressively, so that maybe you only hear the 25 closest sword swings that are happening at a time. But that means that a bunch of sound things that we've been doing, don't, it's not impossible to do certain things anymore. So DB is going to be, it's a DB Unchained, thanks to Dave doing this work.
Yeah, so there's just, like Andrew said, it's a lot of performance improvements mostly in the high numbers of players. Like with a few numbers in players, you probably won't see significant gains, but in the huge epic battles, there's lots of perf gains to be had there.
Okay, so next one is a distortion shader for our particle and effect system. So I don't know, you've probably seen in games where there's sort of sometimes there'll be effects going on that'll take the screen and just warp the image there, kind of like refraction or smudging things where there's flames or something like that. So Wiley is one of our newer programmers, implemented that, added it into our particle system. And so just now we have that. So now sword swing goes through the air, and the air sort of ripples like the Matrix bullet time effects. Those kinds of things are possible. And all kind of, and that just adds to our effects palette, and that's the way it works. The way that works is really cool. If you've never, it's old hat to me as an old rendering guy, but the way it works is pretty neat. What we do is we render out all the opaque stuff in the scene, and then we take the scene so far and just copy that off to a texture. And then when we render particles that are, distortion, warpy, or whatever, the texture that they use is the copy of the screen. And so that means that, and so, except they can just kind of shift the texture coordinates around as they do it. So it comes out looking pretty cool.
Number 8, combat music system. DB is moving some sample instruments around to make a more mega symphonic sample instrument. It'll allow us to have smaller voice counts when we're trying to make something sound big and epic. The goal here is epic combat music without a performance hit. So just more work around audio performance and how DB composes things so that we can get all the cool, badass music and sounds together in the big battles without wrecking your computer. Characters 2.0. We're continuing to update the old meshes from the nude all the way through the armor. The improvements fix some proportion issues. They're using a new UV setup to improve texture fidelity, as well as better bone placement, geometry, and weighting to improve animation. Doing this work better defines our pipeline and sets us up for outsourcing when needed. Some quick breakdowns on some of that stuff, we've been working on a new UV setup. For those of you guys who don't understand how that works, you sort of, if you've ever seen how a character gets unwrapped when there's a flat texture and your whole character is sort of flattened out, and you take your head and that's why it's called unwrapping. You sort of unwrap it and flatten it onto a texture piece.
Flayed.
Yes,
they're flayed. Flay characters. Part of the problem is think about taking an orange peel, peel an orange and just flatten out the orange peel, and there's no way you can do that without adding a bunch of tears along the way, because it's narrower in some places, thicker in others. It's like trying to flatten an orange.
Yeah.
So the way that we define where the cuts are so that it's easy to paint and also composite stuff back together when we layer armor together is sort of it's an art, not a science.
Yeah.
But we have artists.
Yeah, and so there is an art both on how you unwrap it and how much space of the texture. It doesn't have to be 1-to-1 on the texture. Your head on the texture doesn't need to be the same size as your torso, and your torso, if you really wanted to, if your thumbs were super important to your game, you could make your thumbs take up 50% of the texture and the rest of your body take up.
And you could zoom way in on those thumbs and
you could see your hangnails and your cuticles.
Every detail.
and so there's an art of finding which parts of your body are interesting, which ones the player's eye get drawn to, which ones take up lots of screen space, and finding the best use of that texture space. And so the artists have been refining that and figuring out the right distribution of texture space versus model space versus screen space, and also how it's unwrapped so that you can't see the seams when we wrap it back up. So they've done a lot of work around that, and we're excited about it. Updated nude female human rigging. John handed off the updated nude human female to Joe to begin rigging. We are able to use the same skeleton as the male, saving us a bunch of time. Updated armor topology and rigging. John also updated one of the previous armor sets to the new topology, which Joe will rig. Nude male and female unwrap. John has completed the initial unwrap of the nude and female new male and female nudes, so we can create materials on the new UV sheet. A lot of the work is just around sort of unifying the way a lot of this stuff is structured, so that we can do work one time and apply it to multiple models or multiple animations or multiple rigs or multiple skeletons or whatever, so that we don't have to do as much one-off work. I don't know if you've got any more on.
No. You got it. So, specific concrete thing that's actually in the game. New animations for wielding pole arms, new animations for dual wielding swords, new animations for sword and shield combo. They're shiny, they're new, they look really good. So maybe we'll be able to throw a GIF into the weekly update. Yeah. It's always like coming in under the file size limit.
Yeah, and the same thing applies there. We're working on these animations so that they're constructed in a way that can be used across all of the classes, or all of the classes from one realm, or just one specific class. The goal not to be the one specific class, but we can choose to use them in that way. But we're working towards being able to get as many animations in as quickly as possibly, so that we can start hooking up as many abilities for as many classes as quickly as possibly. So we're working on dialing down our iteration time on abilities and asset creation. The new animations not only look better, but they're shareable amongst all the classes, and they use some new updated timing that we've been working on, so that we can have holds and pauses and stuff. Not the old like loops that you guys didn't like when we were in many moons ago, but so that we can stretch and squash the animations, and so they look good sped up, they look good slowed down. So all of that's getting worked into the new animation work. What's some of the other notes Tyler has here? More dynamic styling, and then following sword and sword shield will be rolling into axes, maces, and spears with the swords and shields. Tyler has words, maybe?
No, I just heard you talking about animation.
Tyler's excited about this. We've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah.
People are requesting videos of the animations in the newsletter.
Yeah, we're gonna
scooch over, get your ass over here.
Real quickly, what we're doing, I wanted to wait until we kind of got. Can they see me over here?
Nope.
Nope.
Be
There you go.
in the middle here. So all the changes, basically, if you look at like the stuff we did for Beta 1, styling wise, it kind of, I'm trying to keep this simple, kind of added more pep, more dynamic movement, more ins and outs, more contrast and timing, and the poses were, instead of kind of just, stab a guy, it was a lot more body movement and everything. So all of that stuff, we kind of doubled down on that style so that we could support variable timing. We still need to put the tech in to do that, but what I wanted to do was to have Scott, this takes time, there's a reason we haven't done it yet, is kind of make a video that shows the different phases and the breakdown of phases and kind of how they all work together, so that you can see like a really quick attack, but then take those parts of that quick attack that might be, what was Scott, I think 0.4 seconds was like one of the slowest points we got, just a basic slash, down to all the way up to, we actually got it up to 8 seconds, but it kind of starts falling apart at that point. So like say 5 seconds is a pretty good range. So I wanted to make a video that kind of explained how that actually works and breaks down. And then I just need engineer to implement this, and it should work and be cool.
And part of the point was the old way, like, the animations looked good, but if you slowed them down or sped them up significantly, they didn't look great.
Right.
Because we just sort of did a play them back faster.
Yeah, there was a constant slowdown in the recover and prep phases. And with the stylistic changes of how we're approaching the animations, it's more of the relationship between the parts is a little bit more finer grained, and whatever, like, you know, how much we slow down this period is going to have a direct connection to what we do with this point. So all of it creates this nice little flow so that the characters kind of go in and out of their attacks. And I'm using melee attacks as the example here because it's pretty much the hardest one. You know, how do you make a quick stab or a slash go from really quick, which is relatively easy, to much, much longer in comparison. And we were pretty successful with it, and we just need to implement it. And I've had sign off from like design and engineering kind of going, yep, that all sounds sane.
Yep. I'll come back and fix your animation bugs next week.
Yeah, I need Andrew.
and so there's just been a lot of like taking where before we slowed down or sped up the whole thing, going, okay, this is a good place for like your character to rest before he does a really powerful attack, and so we can put a lot of slowness here and a lot of slowness here, and have a fast attack in the middle, and so it flows and moves better, more organically.
Yeah.
And,
one of the things I kept saying to Scott, I was like, when you hit that guy, I want to feel like you're trying to fuck that guy up. Just nail him really fast. So our characters kind of go into these really great spring-loaded tensions and then really quickly come out of them and then slow back at the end of their attacks and then come back into a rested pose before coming back to idle. And all of it breaks down. Andrew's going to give me better blending. He's going to fix the blending thing that I think is in there that'll help us make this work better. So in the meantime, we're just updating all the animations. We're also making it so the animations can be shared. Using the blending tech will just allow us to have characters use a lot of the basic ability animations without us having to make a lot of extra animations. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. It's been a lot of fun. It's been exhausting. Okay.
you too.
Should stay for the last item on the list.
Yes.
What's the last item?
Beech trees.
Oh, beech trees. B-E-E-C-H. Beech trees. This is a type of tree I asked Dion to go through and come up with a whole bunch of kind of predominant European trees. And granted, this one's in North America and other places. But it's something that looks visually much different than what we have right now. And she's working through it. And one of the funny things with trees and doing 3D art is you kind of... You spend a period kind of going, I can't make this work. I can't make this work. And eventually you go, oh, and you figure out kind of like each different tree, how it kind of works. So right now she's struggling through that phase. And then we'll make some dead trees out of that set just because the way these are built would lend to that. And then what I'm trying to do is just move this down a line of, after I get through the kind of animation write-up, pipeline, Jira flow, tasking, move on to some of the stuff that we've got to do. I've got stuff going on with characters, but I'm also going to stuff with the environment to kind of prep probably some outsourcing packets with just some known issues of how we do everything, and then do oversight on VFX and sound. So, yeah, busy. Everything's getting better. And probably what we're going to have to do is we have to figure out when we're going to make those switchovers, because there's a big technical constraint around the character 2.0. Not as much on the animation, but like when we update the characters, they use all new UV sets. So we got to figure out how much of the new and the old is going to be broken at any given point. That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tyler.
You don't want to stay around for Q&A?
Nope.
No.
All right. We're entering the Q&A portion of this update.
I don't know. We've done so much this week for, honestly, not a lot that is directly visible on Hatchery.
Yeah.
You guys brace yourselves. Like, all of these commits are going to start going in next week, and it's going to be...
Yeah, given the stuff that Andrew's been working on, and the coherent stuff that we've been working on, and some other stuff behind the scenes, I know we've been a little quiet this week in terms of testing. I expect that to pick up significantly next week. I would not be surprised if we had a day or
Be
two
nice to your
with
nose guard, Tim.
huh?
Be nice to your nose guard.
I would not be surprised if we had a day or two next week where we've got like multiple simultaneous tests going on.
So we should note these two are programmers. So ask your tech questions, any kind of design questions, or even will not get an answer today. Dulos OG777 asks, that talk of plots deforming terrain and rivers carving terrain, ... moats, ? Just say yes, please, thank you.
I want to say yes a lot. That's a question of, that's going to be a question on the design side. But yes, that sounds like a wonderful idea. In any case, the tech should be able to support that. I'm not going to absolutely lock us into something that, may have important game balance implications, though.
Sacrix asks,
Oh.
is the round building mode still happening or going to be a feature in CU?
Yes.
Odilvik asks, you mentioned tech debt. How many weeks worth of tech debt do you estimate has accumulated, and will the debt be repaid or left until post-launch?
A lot of this is repaying it. We're in an increasingly good place, so I think we're going to start moving forward. Beta was an instructive thing of, which are the pain points, which are the things that keep biting us, and so we are aggressively addressing those. There's some things that we're just going to say, okay, this is good enough to launch the game. Yeah. But, anything like, okay, this system, like, the skills editor is creaky, and therefore we're not going to finish all the skills in time for launching the game. Like, of course we pay that down.
There's a balance, too, of one of the things we always sort of have to look at whenever we want to improve a system that's already in place and functioning is we have to ask ourselves, is this us just wanting to improve on something for the sake of improving on it because we've learned a better way or we want to do a better way, but does it get us closer to having the things that we want to launch the game with? And if the answer is no to that, we have to really, really consider if it's worth us spending engineering time on it versus getting mages in or getting building deformation in or whatever. So there's a lot of us going, man, I really don't like the way I did this, but it works and it's good enough for beta, or it's good enough for launch or beta 2 or whatever. And so we have to be very careful about the tech debt that we pay back.
Yeah, a lot of the terrain stuff, it was, we can live with this. This is good enough for beta, but it's going to be really hard to say, efficiently implement pathfinding on top of that. And so now that we're talking about pathfinding and NPC guards in a, much more meaningful don't run face first into walls kind of way, it's, okay, now is the time that we had to deal with concurrency and terrain.
Blaine on the YouTube chat asks, can we get more streaming vids of Andrew coding?
So almost this entire week has been like me in meetings, me helping new employees ramp up, me doing code reviews, but as soon as I'm back in the implementing actual game features mode, which I think I will be next week, yes.
TLDR, we have to get Andrew out of architect mode and back into programmer mode for him to have a programmer stream.
Yeah, as the team has grown, I spend a smaller and smaller percentage of my time actually writing code. And, that's as it should be. That's being a good lead, but, I still like it.
Sacrix asks, so Tim, how is Ability Builder stuff and Ben's tools coming? Will Ability Builder be open soon?
The Ben's tool stuff is what we spent the last 37 minutes talking about, basically.
Yeah, turning the ability builder back on so that people can take the skill parts that have already been created and smack together skills with them. That's the, there's the skill part builder, which is the thing that we have that Ben uses, and then there's the actual ability builder that players use. I am honestly not sure what the status of bugs are on turning ability builder itself back on.
What I can tell you about that is Anthony spent some time a couple weeks back with it turned on a dev build, going through and fixing miscellaneous bugs with it. I also know that we opted out of, any of you guys who have played know that there are some restrictions in terms of which weapons your skills will work with. For instance, we were talking about it earlier, the Black Knight. Any of his sword skills will only work with a sword and shield. If you equip 2 swords, you can't use sword skills even though you have twice as many swords equipped. And that's because we were unhappy with the animations, and so we focused on a smaller set of animations. And so as this Animations 2.0 progresses, we had a talk this morning, actually, about where the balance is in terms of getting prototypes into your hands with maybe animations that don't look as great, versus getting finished products and waiting for all the animations to be done. And that's still sort of a little bit of a gray area that we're figuring out exactly where that balance is. I can tell you, like I said, Anthony's been working on crushing some bugs that we found by turning the ability builder back on. Some of the work that we're doing to facilitate getting Ben's editor improved will solve some of those issues as well. The animation work that we're doing will move us in that direction. So there are several fronts that we are attacking this from. It's just not there yet.
Ulvik has a question on sound LODs. Will certain sounds have priorities so they are always played? The sound of a mez spell, the sound of a wall falling, the thump of your healer's corpse hitting the ground.
Yes, well, sounds do have priorities to them, but there's not necessarily a guarantee that they will always play. So, for instance, the sound of a mez spell a kilometer away when there are 50 healers' bodies hitting the ground happening within 20 feet of you, just for instance, okay, maybe that mez spell a kilometer away doesn't get played. Yeah. But, there's absolutely, a prioritization system of, that a mez spell within 100 meters of you is going to get higher priority than any of the footsteps within 200 meters.
Yeah, and that's going to be an ongoing thing that we tune, right? Like we've got like the background sound, like the chatter and shouts of like a fight happening. We might make those play from far away so that that there's a fight going on over that a ways. You might not get a whole lot of details about it, a mez spell or healers hitting the ground over there, but you might know that there's a fight happening over there from the sound of the sort of ambient combat music from that area. And so it's just a thing that we're going to be continually tuning, especially as gameplay develops and emerges and the values of different sound effects change.
Helzek says, Helzek wants to make a MUD to start testing his own game design ideas. Where is a good place to start looking into the programming aspect of an online gaming application software?
If you want classic MUDs, you can just go out there and download CodeLibs. There's tons of dated resources there. In terms of getting started on online games,
I mean, a MUD is certainly an online game.
Yeah. I mean, more specifically, modern online games. I worked with MUDs 20 years ago, and in that way, it's easy to get in and start playing with like the gameplay bits, and understanding the online bits are a little bit more tricky. I mean, that's a lot of your junior engineers start out as gameplay engineers for that reason. Networking can be difficult. That's not to say that gameplay isn't also,
but I mean, that's why, you just start off with, someone else's open source mud code, and that already opens a socket and everything else, and you start adding your own stuff. In fact, I would say that the place to start is that, and start making changes to someone else's mud, and get to a point where you understand why all the parts there are where they are, and then maybe work with another mud, like something totally different, to see, okay, well, these concepts, what are the other ways that someone could do them, what worked, what didn't work, and which of these worked better for this, and why did this work better for this, that worked better for that, what were the trade-offs. And at that point, as you broaden your horizon, you get a better sense of, like, okay, what would I like to do if I were going to have a clean slate. Like, my first job in the game industry that I actually got a paycheck for, not like writing shareware or something, it was doing ports. It was, taking other people's games and converting them to run on the Mac or on the Dreamcast or, whatever other secondary platform. And like in my first 18 months, I got to take apart like games by, all these different major top tier studios and see how every single one of them worked. And like, that gave me like such a good mental palette of like, what are all the different ways that this particular thing can be done, and what are the trade-offs. And I learned way more about game programming from that than I could have if I'd spent those 18 months just making one game. And, of course, at some point you have to turn around and step beyond that and just make your own thing to really learn. But
if that's a thing you're interested in, from what I remember from 20 years ago, ROM, the ROM, the ROM mud, had a fairly large community with lots of plugins and mods and stuff that you could get for it. LPC was interesting in that,
Deku mud.
Well, ROM is a derivative, like a
Okay.
3 generations grandchild of Daiku. LPC basically embedded C code into every monster and item, and so it was highly scriptable in terms of the behaviors you could get out of it. And then my personal favorites, if you really like a PvP tilt, was God Wars or Dystopia.
And maybe some of the people in the chat can, who play current muds, can point you towards some of that.
Helzek says, thanks a ton. Svarty asks, how smart is the physics? Will doing something weird like putting a couple of thin walls in front of the main one screw up projectiles?
We do continuous collision detection. Some physics engines will do stuff where you calculate where a projectile is, you calculate where it will be, and if there is something in between those two places, it has no sense of that. Our physics engine will detect things, and so it will properly hit the intermediary object. So in that way, if you have a thin wall, a gap, a thin wall, a gap, and then a thick wall, it will hit the first thin wall.
It won't skip through. I think he's probably asking, can you actually protect the thick wall? And that's going to depend on the projectile. It's definitely possible for the right projectile to, hit the first wall and have the damage project through to the inner walls, but, it's not, you will get more protection for your building by just building one super thick wall with no gaps, for sure, if you want to spend the resources on that.
Right now there's no line of sight checks for AoEs, so if you're on the other side of a wall, you'll get hit by an AoE. I believe we have plans to fix that. But the current state of things, there is stuff like that. So it's not perfect in that way, but that has less to do with physics and more to do with just how we do our queries.
This might be a design question, but Lotaween asks, I thought the whole idea behind spirit pets was to avoid the need for pathfinding. Is the work going into that now going to change the math on a true pet class viability in the future?
So for a true pet class is that basically turns it's not just the pathfinding, it's every player entity is now, a player entity plus a pet entity. And so, the number of guys walking around is multiplied by 2, and pathfinding is one small part of that. So, I don't think that really moves that. Pathfinding is more along the lines of just having guards who don't run directly into walls, and it's along the lines of having, the various fauna that, the wolves will actually move through the forest in a sane way, and you can, kill them and skin them and get your very important wolf pelt crafting items.
Yeah, the classic pet classes, as Andrew said, had a persistent pet, which was there all the time, which had a persistent cost on the server, as opposed to the spirit pets that were more ephemeral and temporary. And also the way in which they collide with things is different. So yeah, it's just because we have pathfinding doesn't mean we're throwing out all those designs and going crazy with pets.
Odovic asks, with all the threading in CU, how many CPU cores is overkill? 4, 6, 8, 10 more?
So there's a point where the main point is, at what point does your video card become the bottleneck and you're just waiting for the video card to draw the next frame? Or at what point does your memory become the bottleneck and you cannot get enough data in and out of the CPU to actually, supply, and the CPU is just waiting for data to process, and so it's a tricky question to ask. Like, if you have for instance, AMD, they have 2 high-end platforms, Threadripper and Epic is the server one, but the main difference between them is that Epic has twice as memory channels, and so you can actually, there's a way less chance of having like an Epic chip just sitting there waiting for data from memory as a Threadripper. And then, obviously, like, if you're running a GeForce 750 versus a 2080 Ti, like, if you've got a 750, your game's not going to run any faster than the 750, no matter how fast your CPU is. So, the question is one of balance. But let's say, I'm going to say that above 8 cores, you're probably going to be bottlenecked on something else. I can't say for sure. There's a lot of details in your system configuration, but unless you have insanely good memory and an insanely good video card, more than 8 cores at /16 threads is probably not going to improve the performance of the game in a way that is gonna be directly meaningful to you.
CSE Matt asks, why hasn't Dave done my CR yet?
I feel like there's a better channel to get this question answered. Walk over to the screen. You'll have to call us back.
Yeah, Matt. If you walk over to the TV in the programmer pit, and yell at Dave, you will be far closer to Dave than I am right now.
Well, we've kind of come to the end of programming-related questions that I have in the chat so far.
How about metal-related questions? Let's talk about metal.
I have a very small view into this.
Matt says, tell them we can't talk to Dave because we're watching Tim and Andrew.
I'm hearing a lot of excuses.
Do you guys want to kind of close out the stream?
I mean, if the backers don't have any more questions, then fuck them.
Oh.
Oh, well done, Tim.
I don't roll that way, man.
Let's give them their 8 minutes.
All right.
You guys are just gonna have to look at me and Andrew being attractive for the next 8 minutes if you don't come up with any questions.
Svarty has a metal question. What is your favorite carbon content in steel?
Ooh. I don't actually know my carbon content. I mean, I like steel to be kind of flexible. I do not like the brittle steels.
What movies are you guys interested in seeing in the near future?
I hope Venom doesn't suck. Really hope Venom doesn't suck.
I don't see that many movies. Right now, my current project is I discovered my wife had never seen Cowboy Bebop, and so I'm making her watch that with me because everyone should see Cowboy Bebop.
Good.
All right, we have some programming questions again.
Go ahead.
Cyvius asks.
We need to get Ash
I'm
in
playing-
here tasking out our questions.
I'm playing. Current game is God of War for me. Just the environments and just the color grading that they have done. Like, they managed to make every scene just look like some kind of old master's painting. And it's all about the color grading. It's so good.
There have been a lot of comments on Andrew's hat, by the way. I'm just throwing that out there.
It's fantastic. Anyone who says otherwise is wrong.
Okay.
It's on
Cyvius
sale at
asks.
Target right now. The 90s are back in such an uncomfortably awkward way. And
Oh
I'm just
man,
like,
are we gonna get Jinkos?
Yeah, no, they have Jinkos. I mean, it's just like, man,
It's my
this
time
was-
to shine.
This was dumb the first time around. Did we learn nothing?
No.
Cyvius asks, over the last few weeks, people have held the 64-bit upgrade up as the answer to all problems. What should we actually expect to see as different on our end the day it drops?
No more memory crashes.
The day that it drops, the main thing would be that when there's a ton of buildings and players all logged in, we won't have super hard out of memory errors. The follow-on thing to that is we will probably be able to up some of our texture resolutions.
Also, zoning will not be quite so brutal on the memory crashes.
Yeah, zoning's kind of an ugly thing because, like, you have this crossover when, you got to load in the whole new level, or the new zone, but you don't want to completely throw out all the old zone because stuff like trees, like, you don't want to throw out, like, all the meshes for the trees because those trees are still going to be in the new zone. So, like, that overlap time when, it has to overlap a little and there's a lot of data in there.
Some of the science I would like to do there is we have it configured. It is configurable such that you can see the contested island from the home islands, and you can see all of the home islands from the contested island, and we could set it up. I don't think it's set up this way, but we could set it up so that you could see all the housing zones from your home islands. We've turned that off because all those things put pressure on your memory. So when memory is less of a constraint there, we could turn that back on, and you could be able to look across the channel and see people running around on the home island and doing stuff from the contested island, and it becomes a more lived-in world.
4-minute warning, folks. Vladaween asks, is there something we non-programmers would understand that you can explain how you achieved such amazing results on FPS with the Unchained engine compared to other engines?
Designed for it. I'm not gonna put down other people's engines. Like, there are other engines that are out there. They're meant for doing a much smaller number of things, and frankly,
6 guys on the screen that are gorgeous.
yeah, doing them prettier than us. It's God of War is absolutely gorgeous. You can see every pore on Kratos' skin. It's just Kratos and his son and like maybe 5 enemies. And you're never in combat with long draw distances because all the combat's in like little arena-y places. So, I mean, we made a set of trade-offs that let us do this even though we can't do other things quite as well. But, we could always turn the art up. Like, It would be an interesting thing to say, let's make another game. Let's scale it down, and given this engine, how far can we push the quality on a really, really self-contained setting? And that's an interesting question to answer. We have not really tried, because our focus is making this game. But yeah, I think it's, and the second thing is, we started with a clean sheet of paper after the multi-threaded era began. We've had some things that we learned about what does and does not work really, really well, but Unreal has never had the opportunity for a complete clean sheet ground up rewrite since Tim Sweeney wrote a software renderer back in the 90s when Jinkos were popular the first time around.
And Visa was a thing.
Yeah.
To make up for Stream Long Peanut Gallery, CSE Matt has a nice question for us to end with. What is your favorite bit of tech debt to finally retire?
We'll never fully retire Network Window. The horrible abomination known as Network Window.
The bots don't have Network Window.
So yeah, during the Kickstarter, when it was just show stuff to backers no matter, as soon as possible, no matter how ugly it is, I needed a place to put the networking code, and so I put it in the window class. the Win32 window class, the thing that has the border in the close box, and I shoved it in there, and now that's, and so many things assume it's there that it's just virtually impossible to make it not there. So that is the ugliest thing that we will probably never actually get fully rid of.
Colin and Matt and George have tried so hard to make it not there.
So that's the one that's never going away. The one that I was happiest to just murder was there were some mistakes that had gotten into the building code from when I did the first implementation to when I took it back over this spring, and that led to this horrifying series of commits where just the entire commit message were just first-hand accounts of the Dresden firestorm or the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, or just every single thing was just apocalyptic descriptions of scouring clean with fire, and yeah, buildings scale like hell now, so that was a scouring that needed to happen.
I don't know. I'm not so much in the paying back of tech debt business. I make the tech debt and other people pay it. Hi, Matt. But in terms of stuff that I've wanted to do for a while, Colin has been working on some tech so that we can migrate people between proxies. A lot of my time recently has been spent sort of automating and writing around cloud environments and stuff like that. And so we have to do a lot of sort of strange things so that our servers are able to scale up rapidly from small numbers to large numbers and stuff like that. And so the proxy migration stuff that Colin's been working on, which allows us to basically, we've got the game server, and there's lots of what we call proxies, which sit in between the game server and you guys. And the game server tells the proxy about stuff, and the proxy tells you about stuff.
I'd say we have 100 people per proxy. So, the first, as 1,000 people log in, they'll fill up the first proxy, and we'll start a second proxy, and they'll fill that up. And then, as people churn, if they're still maintaining 1,000 people, then, we'll replace them on whichever proxy has the fewest people.
Yep.
But then say 500 people log off, and we've got another 500, but it's 500 random people. So at that point, we still have 10 proxies, but they only have 50 people each on average. Some of them probably have 80, and some probably have 20, but...
And there's 3 of them that just have one guy on them.
And so being able to migrate that guy and then shut those down and keep our web hosting bill low.
Yeah. So that stuff's cool and exciting to me. There's some other neat stuff we can do because of that. And some of the cloud infrastructure stuff we can do related to that. I'm sort of excited to be broaching.
And the cool thing is, like, you don't even notice when it happens. It's just, you start receiving packets from someplace else.
Yep. And then there's some like I said, some cloud stuff I've been working on where right now a lot of our server administration is very hands-on, and that's not sustainable for a large-scale MMO. So I've been making it more and more hands-off recently, and that stuff's neat where I can just like tell somebody like, here, go type in this command line that's 2 commands, and it'll bring a server online and start up a game server and all the proxies and all that jazz.
Be cool to actually get a web interface finally.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna. Right now it's all in scripts. I want to turn it into an actual proper server, and then maybe have one of our
the server.
Yep. Have one of our editor guys.
Have a gameplay server and a building server and a proxy server and a physics server and a server.
Yep. And then we need a server factory. We could have a server factory.
You take your Java and you go home.
All right.
And on that note,
yeah. So I've been in Cloudland lots, and I'm doing lots of fun stuff there. That's I'm glad to be doing.
All right. Let's go break things.
Yay!
All right. Thanks for joining us, folks. Keep an eye out for our updates going out this evening, as well as the monthly newsletter going out this evening. And we will see you later.
See you later, guys.
All right.
You know the fantastic thing about the